Okay, so this is now the first big challenge of the course where I'm going to challenge you to create an app completely on your own. And I'm going to start by showing you the app, and then you're going to have a go at creating it. So the app looks like this. It's pretty simple. It says how many fingers at the top, so that's a label. And then we've got a question, how many fingers, and I'm holding up. And then when we press the guess button, the computer generates a random number between 0 and 5, and it checks to see if we got it right. So for example, I might guess 3, and then tap guess, and it says wrong, it was a 2. I might keep going. Oh, it was a 2 again. Oh, this time it was a 4. 4 again, and another 4, and another 4. What are the chances? 5, 4, 2, 0, 2. Eventually, it'll be a 3. And there we go. We get there in the end. So you'll need to add all of these elements, the labels, the text field, a button, and another label. And then you'll need to add outlets and actions, just as we did in the Cat Years app. And finally, you'll need to write the code to generate the random number and check to see if the user's guess was the same as the random number. So the one thing I'm going to show you before I set you the challenge of doing that is how to generate a random number, because we haven't done that yet. So we'll do that over in our playground, and it's pretty straightforward. So say we want a random number between 0 and 5, for example. Then we'll create a variable to represent our random number. I'll call it dice roll, just to make it clear, but you can call it random number or whatever you like. And to generate our random number, we use a function called arc for random and then underscore uniform. And what this does is essentially creates a random number uniformly distributed across a whole range of numbers. And it's going to be a random number between 0 and 1 less than the number that you put in the brackets. So if we want a random number between 0 and 5, we're going to put a 6 in there. And this will then generate a random number between 0 and 5. So it's essentially, we've got a 6 there. So there are 6 different options, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, for our random number. So you can see it's generating a 5. If I press play, it generates a 3. So we can see it's generating different numbers every time. There we go. So that's the only new piece of code that you need to write this app. So now it's time for you to go and create that on your own. Of course, I will go through the process afterwards. So if you have any problems at all, then just fire up the video and I'll show you how it's done. Otherwise though, I'll give you a moment to pause it and then go off and create the How Many Fingers game. Best of luck. Okay, I hope that went well. I'm going to start, as we almost always do, with a new project. So File, New Project. And then as before, we'll choose Single View Application. And I'm going to put How Many Fingers in the product name. And then just save it there on the desktop. Notice I missed off the question mark on the end of the name. I'd probably recommend doing that. It can cause problems having it in the bundle identifier, but feel free to try it with the question mark if you want to. Okay, so I'm going to start over on main storyboard, and this is where we'll create the look for our app. So it's going to be pretty simple. We'll start off with a label. So remember, go down to the object library. If you can't see the circle and blue square in blue, then just tap on that and you'll then be able to see all these objects that you can drag in. And we want to start with a label. So I'm going to bring in my label. There we go. Double click on it to change the text. And this will just be the title of my app. I'll make it a little bit bigger just by clicking the up arrow on the font there, and then stretch out the label box, drag it back into the middle, and center align the title in the box. There we go. Then I'm going to add in another label, and this is going to be just a little bit of instruction. I'm going to drag it to the edges of the screen. You can see we've got these nice blue guides, which means it will be close to the edge of the screen, but not exactly at the edge. So we'll ask the question, how many fingers am I holding up? Question mark. And we'll keep that smaller, but we'll center that one too. Okay, next we'll need a text field to store the user's answers in. So I'll just drag that in and leave it exactly like that, except I will change the keyboard type to the number pad to make it easier for the user to enter a number directly in the box. Okay, nearly there. Next, I'm going to have a button, which is what the user will press when they want to guess the number of fingers. And finally, I'll add another label at the bottom, which is where I'll put the success or otherwise of the user's guess, so i.e. where I'll tell them whether they're right or wrong. And I'll center that text as well. Okay, so hopefully you managed to get this far. This is just really remembering the names of the different types of user interface elements and then dragging them all into the right place on your screen. Next, we do the slightly trickier step of creating the outlets. So if you remember, the outlets are what connect the elements in your user interface to your code. And it enables you to interact with, so the text field, the guess button, and the label. So I'm going to start with the text field. And remember, we hold down Control and drag from one to the other. And we want to drag just under where it says Class View Controller. And then we want a name for our text field. So I'll call it Fingers text field. And notice again the capitalization there. We start with a small letter, and then at the beginning of the second and third and fourth and fifth word, we put a capital letter just to make it nice and readable. Okay, and I didn't mention it earlier, but I pressed the double circles to bring up the assistant editor, so I can see both of these in one. Next, the guess. So we want to do something when the user makes a guess. So I'm going to Control drag that in as well. But importantly here, I'm going to change the connection to an action. So that will mean that we'll get some code which will run when the user presses the guess button. And I'll just call that guess. And finally, we'll Control drag from the label to create an outlet for the label, and I'll call that the result label. There we go. That's all the outlets that we need. We don't need to do anything with these first two labels, so we're going to leave those as they are. One slight change I'm going to make is just to delete the text from that label. So it's not visible until we actually put some text in it using our code. All right, and then we'll get rid of the assistant editor by clicking the button to the left of it there. So we're just looking at one file, and the file that we're going to be writing our code in is, of course, viewcontroller.swift. So as before I write any of my code to actually run the game, I'm going to just fill in the guess method, which is the chunk of code that will be run when the guess button is pressed. And I'm just going to print guess pressed. So that will tell me that everything's connected up right, and give me a chance to just check the user interface and make sure that everything looks right. So I prefer running it on the iPhone 6s. It's a better size for my screen. So I'm just going to select that and then press play, and that will launch the simulator and run the app right here on my machine. And here we go. So the interface looks great. Let's just go back to Xcode and remove that left pane there so that we can only see the console, which is what we're interested in, and then tap the guest button, and there we go. Guest pressed. And we've got a little bit of information as well that we've had a touch on the screen, but really what this is telling us is that our code is working as intended. Great. So now let's write our code to run the game. So what we want to do is first generate our random number and then test to see if what the user entered is equal to our random number or not. So let's create, as before, a variable called dice roll. And if you remember, we use arc for random uniform, and that gives us a random number between 0 and 1 less than the number that we're going to enter. So we want a random number between 0 and 5, because that's the range of fingers that we're going to imagine our computer has, same as us, and that's how we'll get that random number. So next we need to check to see if the dice roll is the same as the number that the user entered. So to get the number that the user entered, we're going to use fingers text field. And to get the value of that, we use fingers text field dot text, just as we did in the cat ears app. And what we want to do is check to see if fingers text field dot text is equal to, and remember we need the double equals there because we're testing whether it's equal to something, not setting it equal to something. And we want to check to see whether that's equal to dice roll or not. Now, before we go on and write what happens if it is equal though, we're going to get an error here, and that's because fingers text field dot text is a string, it's just a collection of characters, and dice roll is an integer, a whole number. So we need to make them the same type so that we can compare them. And the simplest way to do that is to convert the dice roll integer to a string, which we saw how to do a couple of videos ago, just like that. So we use the string command to convert it from an integer to a string. So if it's correct, then we'll set the result label to have a text of "you're right." Simple as that. And if it's not, we'll set the result label to have a text of "wrong," and then we'll tell them what the correct answer was. So it was A, and then because it's a string, I can just append that on the end. So dice roll, and then we'll put a full stop on the end as well. There we go. So let's test it out. It should, every time someone taps the guess button, generate a random number between 0 and 5, convert that to a string, and then test to see if the number that the user entered is equal to that random number. And if it is, tell them that they're right. If it's not, tell them that they're wrong and give them the correct answer. So let's try this out. I'm going to put in a 2. And then guess, wrong, it was a 4. Oh well, let's just keep on going. Oh, it was a 4 again. 3, 1, 5, and eventually I get the correct answer. Brilliant. So a very simple app, but hopefully it gave you an opportunity to practice creating your elements, dragging them around, creating the outlets and actions to interact with them, and then using this if-else construction as well as your variable creation to test if a certain condition was met. All right, so congratulations, well done for making this app. I hope you enjoyed it. We're going to now go back to Playgrounds to learn about the other fundamental programming construct, so as well as if statements, and this is loops.